Happy New Year. Pleasure to see all of you in this new year. Okay, I know the music just ended with my voice. I don't know. Maybe some kind of effect right there. Let's see. James, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And Madam Clerk, if you would call the roll.
Thank you. Good morning. Today is Thursday, January 16th, 2020, and this is the SACOG board meeting. As always, this meeting is being live audio streamed and recorded for posting on the SACOG website. Director Allard, absent. Cabalden. Here. Douglas. Present. Conant for Flores. We'll note that Director Conant is here. Yeah. Thank you. Frost, absent. Gallardo. Yes. Gore. Here. Harris. Here. Jankovitz. Here. Jennings.
Here.
Joyner.
Here.
Kennedy. Here. Kozlowski. Absent. Leahy.
Here.
Lozano.
Here.
New.
Here.
Onderco.
Here.
Peters.
Here.
Samayoa.
Here.
Saragosa. Absent. Saylor. Absent. Chenier.
Here.
Slowey.
Here.
Spokley.
Here.
Stallard.
Here.
Soon.
Here.
Tixa.
Here.
Veerkamp.
Here.
West. Absent. Vice Chair Frericks.
Here.
Chair Sander.
Here.
And ex officio member Tucker for Benny Paul. Here. Thank you.
Very good. A quorum having been established, we are going to move on to public communications. This is the time for anyone who wishes to address the board on an item that does not appear on our agenda to address our board. Are there any such requests? I have none in front of me. Okay, then we are moving right along to the next important business, the induction of our new chair. So I'm going to ask, is it Mr. Trost who has this duty?
Yes.
To join me, and we will swear in a new chair of our SACOG board.
Yeah, swearing in to get sworn in.
Will you, Lucas Frericks, solemnly swear that you will support and defend the Sacramento governments, the Capital Valley Regional Service Authority for Freeways and Expressways, and the Airport Land Use Commission against all enemies, that you will bear true faith and allegiance to SACOG, SAFE, and the ALUC, that you take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, that you will faithfully discharge the duties upon which you are about to enter, and during such times as you serve as an officer of SACOG, SAFE, and the ALUC, you will faithfully discharge the duties of the office according to the best of your abilities.
I will.
Congratulations.
Great. Thanks so much.
Okay, and with that, as now your past board chair, I'm going to hand over the gavel to our new chair.
Thank you. Thanks very much. All right. Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. So one quick question, just logistics question. Do we need to do the vice chair as well, or swearing, or that's already okay? Great. So just announce that Ricky Samayoa, we know, has been elected as vice chair, and we're looking forward to working together this year. So with that, we'd like to now, of course, recognize and thank outgoing Chair Sander for his leadership over the past year. We're going to start by a presentation by Assemblymember Ken Cooley. Thanks so much, Assemblymember, for joining us today. And while we also do that, I just want to quickly announce I have some guests here as well, too. Assemblymember and former board member of SACOG, State Assemblymember Cecilia Aguiar Curry is with us this morning. Yeah. her Chief of Staff and Legislative Director, John Ferreira and Angela Pontes, longtime friends of mine. And we're also honored to have Davis City Manager Mike Webb as well here this morning. So, appreciate it. So, if you would you join, Assemblymember Cooley up there? Oh, sure, absolutely, Assemblymember Cooley, certainly. Yeah.
I want to say what a great honor to be at SACOG. I never, well, I wasn't an alternate at SACOG, but when the lead dog in your city is Linda Buzz, you don't have any leads. So I served as an alternate.
Is here. I think we're on. I'll lean in.
There we go. The
the
podium
whole-
goes up.
There's
Help
also
'em
an
out,
electric
folks.
shock button, be careful.
Yeah, it's an ejection
Oh,
seat.
it's mechanical.
There we go.
Just want to say it's an honor to be at SACOG this morning. I served always as an alternate, and my lead person was Linda Budge, so there just were not many occasions when I was actually needed because what a great worker she is. But of course, I served 10 years in City Council with David, and we did our founding out there. And what a great success Rancho Cordova has become. Because it relates to headlines, I do want to note that little known fact of Rancho Cordova, this era when we talk about housing and homeless, when we formed our city, little old Rancho Cordova with 5% of Sacramento County population housed 38% of Sacramento County's emergency and transitional housing. And you never heard a peep out of the community that that was a problem. It was supported by services. We've expanded that to incorporate housing for emancipated foster youth, which is a particular concern of mine. 2 of my grandkids come out of our foster care system here in Sacramento County. And then, of course, the veterans housing that with his predecessor as Mayor Bob McGarvey, David's been very instrumental in. So I think in this era, among the many things I just want to extol the virtue of David Sander and his leadership is Rancho's been doing a lot on the issue of homeless. It's perhaps off your radar screen, but again, I repeat, we formed a city when we have 5% of the population and 38% of the transitional and emergency housing right there at the former Maythew Air Force Base. And of course, I look at my colleague Susan Peters, who also has played a key role in that at the county level. And then I just want to say, what a great work SACOG does, and the leadership of David, his service here since 2012, your chairmanship, meeting that deadline by 5 days on the transportation plan in order to make a difference for the citizens of our region. What a milestone. I think that is the work of government, to look where there's a need and do an intervention that makes a difference. And this leads me just to reflect upon, we sit right across the street from the Capitol campus. And a couple of observations I'll make about the general campus of the Capitol that relate to the work of SACOG. Every lamp in Capitol Park, all of these ones out here with the crystal globe on top, every darn one of them, you walk up to that lamp, you see the base anchor on the ground. About 1.5 feet off the ground, there's what looks like a ring encircling the lamp. And lo and behold, when you walk up, that ring is actually a bundle of sticks laced together. Very ancient symbol of our system of government. We take a bunch of people who take an oath of office, as you just did, and we bind ourselves to work on the future together. And what a better image of SACOG, the 6-county region, everyone working together, this bundle of sticks. On the west portico of the Capitol, it's actually the statuary out there in the west portico, I'll tell you, is actually an allegory that relates to the work you do here in SACOG, but at each one of your independent jurisdictions. I look at you, Bonnie, and everyone else, Jeff, who I serve with. On top of the state capitol, the west side, it's actually a pretty damn crazy thing. There is a raging grizzly bear attacking a rider on horseback. There's also a buffalo attacking a maiden with a baby. It's like, what in the world does this have to do with our state capitol? But if you go over and stand there and look at that allegory on top of the west pediment, what you see is those two figures are outside sort of the triangular pediment. And inside there is Minerva, who is holding a lance and a shield. So this is an offensive defensive tool. It's sort of the toolkit of government. She's flanked by community life, education, justice, industry. So that gets to the fabric of our communities. But at her feet, beneath the shield, she has subdued a grizzly bear. So it's this picture that in our work in government, our job is actually to keep our eye on what is the contemporary hazard, whether it's a new rule in the federal government administration that might affect transportation funding, or whatever it would be, and try to subdue the darn bear. Collective effort, focused on how do we just kind of preserve quality of life, and it is certainly the electeds who take that oath of office, but it's the whole community. And then that brings me, since I'm on this little Capitol Campus excursus, and I'm actually here to honor David Sander. The building across the street, the Unruh building, has a great inscription on the day that we honor David Sander. It's politically incorrect because it uses the word men, but it has in mind that so many Californians came here over the rock wall this year in wagons. What incredible fortitude it takes to climb the rock wall this year is by wagon in the fall of the year, worried about the weather. The first wagon train in 1844 had to ford the river 24 times as it slowly gained elevation. They'd get to a point where the Canoe Wall came in, they had to cross the Truckee River 24 times, then up the top behind Donner Slope, where that talus slope of broken rock from millennia of rain and freezing. They found a cliff on the top of that. They actually had to disassemble their wagons and hoist them over the cliff, continue on the way. But the state's first office building, remember this epic part of our state's history, is inscribed, "Bring me men, people, to match my mountains." So that allows me to just turn and remark upon your tenure, David, both in the city, the work of starting a new city, your work in the National League of Cities. You know, you wear with pride, I know, our new 2019 All-America City pin, but of course the first one was 2010. The work you provided on regional transit over the years. And I know the work you've been doing here at SACOG to marshal this thing across the finish line early, to subdue that particular bear, to confer a benefit on our county and region. So I'm very pleased today. Now I welcome you up, David. David Sander, it is such a great honor. Dr. David Sander, to just thank you for your long service. As much as your colleagues know of your skills, I know it better because
That's our new standard.
you just put your hand to so many things, touch so many lives. This is a resolution honoring you for that. I'm joined in presentations by Senator Nielsen, also Senator Borges. So, little known fact, Rancho Cordova actually has 3 state senate districts within our borders.
Wow.
And a fourth touching us on the
Crazy,
west
yeah,
side at Bradshaw, that's Richard Pan. So Rancho Cordova is sort of the home of so much of the state. 36% of the state's land area is tied up in those 4 senate districts. And we have 2 of them here joining. So David, it's just a great honor.
Thank you.
Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for racing the 2020 transportation plan through the regional housing numbers process. All of these things that I know have been on your plate. I just thank you for your leadership, but I definitely want to say, you know, I've conveyed to the governor's chief of staff in the last 7 days this story about Rancho Cordova and homeless, and how there needs to be a commitment to services, or all is lost. But if you have services, then you have the hope of actually taking care of people in a way that does not dislocate others. So living out American values.
That's right.
In Rancho Cordova and the region. So thank you again.
Right. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you. There's more, yep, don't leave yet.
That, it may be enough, but it wouldn't, I wouldn't be okay without really giving you my heartfelt thanks as the chair of this agency. And as we always do, we have a plaque for our outgoing chair. But I do want to just say to the board and to people who are here today, what a legacy. I know you're not going anywhere and you're staying on the board, thankfully, but what a legacy you've left for us. I think you have taught us as an agency and me about the importance of suburban revitalization. Without your leadership, I don't think we would have had Civic Lab Year 2. We wouldn't have had Green Means Go and the passion that David put behind that in terms of getting the state to notice our region and our suburban corridors and our small towns and our sometimes overlooked communities. We wouldn't have had the Commercial Corridor Task Force, which is now going to live on, and Chair Lucas will announce that in a second. Suburban revitalization, innovation. You've been a leader, and you've pushed me from the very beginning on rethinking things, thinking outside the box, not just Civic Lab, but obviously the autonomous shuttle. We got it at Sacramento State University. You brought it to the Rancho Business Park. You've pushed us time and again. And last but not least, government efficiency, easy to say and hard to do. You have been pushing us. You are the reason that we adopted a transportation plan 4 months early and got it right under that deadline. We got approvals in 5 days. We actually had the second best delivery record of any region in California last year. We got $12 million of additional obligation authority for transportation projects, and $28 million was out the door earlier than it ever would have been. But mostly, I want to say you're a model to me of public service. And I can't say enough about your leadership for your community and for our board. And so thank you very much from us and all the staff.
Hear, hear.
Well, I probably don't need to say this to all of my elected colleagues sitting around this table, but as all of you know, none of us operates in these jobs in a vacuum. We are all part of a team. It's our democracy, our republic requires it. And so I have had the great honor to serve with you this past year at SACOG. These are not really accomplishments of mine so much as accomplishments of us. And I've also had the honor to work with our great staff at SACOG and see them through an interesting year. But again, that's not to my credit, that's to theirs, because we are all in this together. And of course, it's almost impossible to follow the words of Ken, Assemblyman Cooley, other than to say thank you. And it was a great honor serving with you in Rancho Cordova and laying a groundwork for everything we're still accomplishing there. And you have set a measure of leadership, I think, that all of us could aspire to in the region. So thank you very much for your words this morning. It's been an honor to work with you, and I look forward to much more progress in partnership with you, particularly on Green Means Go.
Absolutely.
Since we've got you here this morning, I know where your heart lies on that, and we look forward to many years working with you in the future. But thank you all very much.
Hear, hear. All right, great. So thank you again, Assemblymember Cooley. Appreciate you being here with us today, very much so. Directors, just a couple of announcements. So committee assignments are included in the board folders. The sort of lots of purple ink, you might see that color document there. Also, I want to remind the board about members who've been appointed to the Commercial Corridor Task Force. That is Director Sanders going to be the chair, but also Allard, Frost, Gallardo, Harris, Jankovich, Kozlowski, Samayoa, Saragosa, Chenier, and Slowey. And then we actually have an update on the members from the primarily from the private sector that have been appointed as well. So Deanna Ellis, VP of Land Resources, Cressley Homes, Isabel Domencio, Managing Member in NorCal Office Lender New Economics, Michael Stretch, Executive Director, North State BIA, Jen Matulich, Senior VP of Business Development, Five Star Bank, Chet Hewitt, CEO of Sierra Health Foundation, Jose Bodipo Membo, District Chair of ULI Sacramento, Louise Bedsworth, Executive Director of the Strategic Growth Council from the state, Julie Young, Principal and Founder of Urban Elements, Stephen Dawes, Regional Director of Real Estate Development, Mercy Housing, Sandra Drown, Executive Director of Yuba City Downtown Business Association, and Amy Lapin, Executive Vice President, Economic Planning Systems. There actually still may be, I think, one or two more individuals that's out there that may still yet to be appointed, but the task force's first meeting is January 28th, 9 to 11 here at SACOG. If you have any questions or concerns about the schedules and availability, please either let myself know or Lynette know as you see fit. So let's see, let me go back to the agenda here. Switching to the consent calendar. Sorry. So these items are, of course, intended to be approved in one motion, but anyone can remove an item for discussion if need be. Does the director wish to remove an item from the consent calendar?
Move approval of consent calendar.
Thank you. Not seeing and hearing. We've got a motion from Director Stallard, second from Director New. Any questions, comments, or discussion? Hearing and seeing none. Actually, we do have to have, of course, a roll call. I'm just used to calling for the vote. We'll do the roll call. Or no?
Hi, Chair Ferris, we can use the
The
roll
unit.
call from
Great,
earlier if you'd
perfect.
like.
My apologies. So any questions, comments, or discussion on this item? Seeing and hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Any abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Thanks very much. Consent calendar is approved. We'll move along now onto our primary action item for the day, item 4. It's a public hearing on the unmet transit needs in Sacramento, Sutter, Yolo, and Yuba counties and the cities therein. Barbara Von Bechtold was going to present the item for us. Good morning. We need to have that mic on.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay.
Mic's on now.
Great.
We're holding the final public hearing here before the board as required by the Transportation Development Act. We've held 5 prior hearings throughout the 4-county area for which we do the unmet transit needs process each year that allows us to process approximately $85 million in TDA funds to the jurisdictions that qualify to use TDA funds as well as the Sacramento Regional Transit District. So with that, I'd ask you to open the public hearing for any further public comments we have on unmet transit needs.
Great. Thank you very much for the presentation. First of all, any questions from members, directors? Not seeing or hearing any, so we're going to open up the public hearing. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to address or comment on this item? And any additional board members' questions or comments? Not seeing any. We'll close the hearing. Let's see. So do we have a motion to approve? We have a motion. We have a second. Motion by Soon, a second by Conant. Any additional questions, comments, or discussion? Hearing and seeing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Barbara. So we actually are going to be getting ready to do our workshop soon, but I'm not sure our guests have arrived. That's right. So we're gonna sort of adjust the schedule a little bit. Let's see here. Moving on to we're going to start with the informational. Should we do the informational items, or do you want to do the closed session now? We'll do the informational items. So item 6, the year ahead SACOG priorities. James.
Okay, thank you, Chair Frericks. I think we have a presentation, a PowerPoint on this. Maybe I have a clicker somewhere around. As is custom, I think at least this is custom last January, so it's become custom now. We wanted to give you a bit of a preview for the year ahead in terms of the work plan. You obviously have the work plan in your packets. You have some background material there. This went to the Strategic Planning Committee in the fall of 2019. And for those of you on the SPC, we actually took a lot of your comments. We had a good, robust discussion there. We changed the work plan, and I just really wanted to make sure that everybody was on the same page in terms of the full board for the year ahead and what you can expect, because I think, as it's already been alluded to, it's going to be another busy year, but some very, very important initiatives that we're going to undertake. Thank you so much. So again, if you remember, just to go back, the board's now, at least under my tenure, had 2 retreats. Out of the first retreat, We really came up with 10 broad goals at the second retreat in Rancho Cordova last spring. The board expressed a lot of interest in narrowing those 10 because you couldn't remember past 3. So we're now at 3. Just trying to see if we can. But I think it's an important thing, right? The elevator pitch on what you do and what we do here at SACOG actually is a very important thing in terms of the relevance that we have to the region. So we have 3 goals: economic prosperity, connected communities, and vibrant places. And under each of those, again, is in your handouts in the work plan. We have a lot of work ahead of us this year. I want to pause and just remind you too that a lot of this work that's coming up this year is actually about implementing plans that are actually already there. The first, obviously, really important that we've referenced this morning, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy. We don't want that to be a paper exercise every 4 years. It tells us as a region that we need to hustle and do things differently. So it is about implementing the MTP-SES. We have an economic prosperity framework and strategy that actually is being finalized, but there's a lot of things in there, as this first goal suggests. That plan will actually be finalized the next couple of months, and in many ways we're already implementing it. For the first goal, we have the prosperity plan implementation. As you know, for the rural-urban connection strategy, which really is about economic prosperity in our rural areas and working landscapes and the economic value of rural places and small towns, I will tell you there's a work plan afoot, but there is going to be a lot of work this year in terms of continuing to actually think about how we can, in some ways, rethink and reboot RUCS, rural-urban connection strategy, and make that a closer piece of our prosperity plan. And finally, you're going to hear in a second another presentation from Monica Hernandez on our staff about the next round of innovative mobility. We're trying to take the Civic lab model, condense it into a shorter amount of time, and really try to address the ongoing challenges we have for transportation and mobility around the region. Goal number 2 is connected communities. This really speaks in many ways to our transportation kind of core capacity and strength and resources here at this agency. I know many people think about us, if they know us, they think about us as a transportation agency. I try to keep reminding people that I believe anyway that transportation is one of the biggest tools that we have, but actually we are trying to use transportation to get economic outcomes at the end of the day. It isn't just about transportation in and of itself. So we have the other part of our Innovative Mobility Solutions program. We have the Next Generation Transit Initiative, which is really about rethinking mass transit and public transportation in the region across all 6 counties. And then last but not least, we have a funding round later this year for the 4 counties. And per the board retreat last spring, we know we need to keep on working with your staff to make sure that we are competitive at the state level and the federal level for grants, bringing more money into the region for transportation projects. This is a big year for Senate Bill 1. This is a big year for competitive grants at the state and the federal level, and I will remind you that one of the many benefits of adopting that transportation plan, MTP, back in November and adopting it 4 months early is, at least for now, we are still eligible for those state grants, and we were at risk of being cut off from them. So, again, a really, really important milestone we hit last November. Under Chair Sanders' leadership, and I probably should have mentioned this as well, but we are a region that is, at the moment, probably the biggest region in the United States without any kind of toll facility, express lane, anywhere. We have no toll bridge, we have no hot lane, we have nothing. And in our plan, we envision moving to a network of express lanes across the region. In our plan, we actually envision to getting rid of the state gas tax eventually. That day is going to come within the 2 decades of this plan, and we have to be ready with something else. So that mileage-based pricing pilot is a sort of a funny name, but it really is about trying to lay the groundwork for us to be a leader in the state and the nation, to imagine what comes after the gas tax. How do we pay into a system? How do we generate revenue? And how does it maintain the network of roads and transit networks and rails? I mentioned the funding round, and finally, we have, I think, a really exciting initiative kicking off for regional trails that we got a grant from Caltrans for. that we're going to be engaging all of your communities in. And the vision there, again, is how can we connect every single community, all 28, with a network of trails that are safe and convenient, and get people of all ages everywhere they need to go. And finally, on Vibrant Places, this is, in many ways, the year of housing. Yes, you've adopted RENA, but a lot of your staff now are going to be working on housing elements. We have resources, really probably the most resources we've ever had from the state of California, all of us collectively, to work on housing. We've heard you loud and clear that the RENA process feels a little bit like a numbers game, and what you want to know and see is production. So we want to work with your jurisdictions to actually figure out how can we actually try to solve some of the production challenges, getting more housing built in the kinds of places where we don't need to put as much of a demand on the transportation system. Green Means Go is a critical program we're going to hear about in a second, and our two guest speakers today we're going to be discussing. We have to implement Civic Lab Year 2, partly that's through that Commercial Corridor Task Force. We have an ongoing project on rural main streets, helping out our main streets all across the region to revitalize, to get more economic activity. And then finally, coming out of the board retreat as well last spring, there's a lot of interest in revisiting the blueprint, which is now almost 2 decades old. Most of the people either in office or working on your staff were not around for the original blueprint, but we think it is actually incredibly relevant, and it is time perhaps for a refresh. So finally, just to break this down again, if what's happening in 2020, things that actually are on our docket and our calendar, and that we know we are running full speed on implementation. Again, the Green Means Go funding request, that you're going to hear more in a second, but we have an ask for each and every one of you on Green Means Go. It is our chance to get the state to give us the funding, the attention, and the profile that we really need to make a lot of our economic development and housing aspirations come to life. We have the funding round for the 4 counties, as I mentioned earlier, that you'll hear more about in the next few months, but very, very important. And you've seen most of these, but these are kind of on the docket and happening. And I will say Chair Frericks has really pushed the mega region. We actually have an MOU with our neighboring counties, San Joaquin and the Bay Area. We have a mega region committee. You can see the folks, the board members that Chair Frericks has nominated for the mega region committee. There will be 3 meetings of that committee this year, starting February 21st, and there will probably be a summit with some of our economic and business partners from the Bay Area, probably in late August, and we'll have more information about that. And finally, we're delighted that many of you are joining us in San Diego in a couple of weeks, and we're also doing another site visit to the DC suburbs right before Cap to Cap. Yeah, Director Frost.
For those of us that were not here previously, is it possible to understand what exactly is the mega region, what jurisdictions fall in it,
Sure.
like on a map, and also what is it that we hope to accomplish
Sure.
with this mega region summit? Some of us are not on the committee or in the conversations.
And to be clear, you know, I think the effort we've had with those our peer regions and agencies and counties has been a bit dormant. And so again, to Chair Frericks' credit, he's trying to kick that back to life. Just simply put, the geographic mega region is the 9-county Bay Area. So starting in Solano County, going all down to Santa Clara and San Joaquin County, and us as SACOG. And I would say that part of the desire of the mega region effort is to actually knit our 26, 27 counties closer together, and to have an economic strategy that is about businesses that might leave California who are currently located in the Bay Area to come here, at least locate part of their companies here, and to have transportation connections that more easily get people back and forth. That's about the easiest way I can explain it without getting into data and modeling and what's happening in the travel model.
Yeah,
because there is some actual coordination around data and modeling that's super important, but a bit technical.
And you said there was an MOU between the local.
Yep.
Can we see that?
Sure,
MOU?
of course.
Yeah. And Director Frost, I would just say, additionally to James's description, I think, you know, part of it is also there's all these areas in which we already act, there's two separate regions, certainly, or, three separate regions, but Bay Area, Sacramento region, San Joaquin, but where there's a lot of overlapping things. So for example, the Capital Corridor is a good example, right? The train that runs from Santa Clara up through, into Placer County, right? Spanning the mega region. There's two Caltrans districts, right, that adjoin both, both sort of Bay Area wide and up here in District 3. So there's a number of, and then the other item would be also, James just touched on it briefly, the sort of business community, GSEC, the Bay Area Council, Silicon Valley Leadership Group, all of those business organizations all are very interested, the Metro Chamber as well, but all are very interested in, they already all work together on these issues. And so, for example, the CEO of Raley's was just named by the Bay Area Council as the head of they were already starting to work on, from the business community, a mega region effort, right? Sort of working together, just, info sharing and such, but also how to strengthen the bonds between the Bay Area and Sacramento region, especially as it comes to transportation and housing and things like that. And so that is an example where the CEO of Raley's is here. I mean, it's a company that's headquartered here in West Sacramento and in our region, and yet they're doing work in the Bay Area on behalf of the business community. So anyway, there's a variety of ways we want to sort of see how we can collaborate with the adjacent regions to us, especially as it relates to transportation and some of the other sort of things that we work on in SACOG.
Okay, great. So you'll email that to us?
Yes,
Thank you.
Yeah.
I know Lynette's already on it. She's made the note before you even made a
Excellent.
comment.
I'm Director Chenier and then Director Saylor.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just quickly, James, could you talk just a couple of bullets on the work plan and the timing on the Trails Initiative and how you see that unfolding?
Sorry, I got the Trails Initiative. You said
Just the work plan and the timing of that. Like, where will the board involvement be?
Well, we are just kicking that off. Again, we're thankful to Caltrans for providing that grant. And so we're starting right now with all of your staff, basically doing kind of a base case scenario. What are all of your local plans for trails? And we've gotten some of your input around parks as well, because that's actually parks and trails. And so thank you to some of you that have given us some advice. I know we'll be touching back at least with the Transportation and the Lunar Committee this year, somewhat frequently. The idea is to sort of get the base case, what's already planned, to look at some new opportunities. Many of you have already tipped us off on, there's a lot of levee reconstruction happening all over the region. And those are actually, if we can work with some of the flood control agencies, great opportunities for trails to link our communities. So I would say you're going to get at least 2 bites at this, and we're probably going to do a full board workshop this spring. And we're also potentially working with the Youth Leadership Academy, at least to get their input on it.
Great. So I'd be interested wherever there's board involvement. I'm very interested in that, and I think I saw Stacy Anderson here. Bringing the YLA into that is a really appropriate place to have them work.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you. Director Saylor.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on your comments, Director Frost and Chair Frericks, on the mega region efforts. That we invigorated that effort in 2015. And at that point, we recognized that the transportation connections among the jurisdictions within that 16 counties were very significant for the prosperity of all of us in the mega region. And so we were focused at that point on some of the rail issues, some of the Capital Corridor, but also the Altamont connection, that ACT route between San Joaquin County and the Bay Area. Nowadays, that is even more pressing, and we're now engaged actively in projects on Interstate 80 from Carquinez Bridge all the way in on Interstate 80. Interstate 5 is also a significant issue for us, and Caltrans has been really effective leaders in creating collaboratives. So I think we've got opportunities here that could be historic and could make a big difference for the future of our region by collaborating not just among our 6 counties, but with the rest of the region. So I'm really supportive of this effort to restart, kind of invigorate that effort that we launched in 2015. So it's a really an important recognition of the need.
Why did the conversation die?
I think we all took different paths. I think our SACOG board, I think we were involved in getting the MTP SCS up and running, doing some of the funding rounds. I think other players, Greater Sacramento, was taking leadership in some of the knitting together the regional business communities. And I think we probably were working in the background on a lot of these topics, but hadn't named it and hadn't involved this board. I think that's my sense of it. But
Yeah, I think
others-
all the different, those three MPOs have been working on all the issues that they work on in their own jurisdictions, but also no one MPO particularly owned it in terms of sort of spearheading it for, and so we're decided we would be able to take that on for at least the purposes of this year and potentially for a 2-year term. So, additional questions or comments, Director Cobalden?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a really exciting work plan across a range of opportunities that are in front of us, as well as our usual federally mandated requirements. I do think as this is leading into the state initiatives panel, that it's important for us to leave room this year for all of that. So that we don't end up at a point where, in May, we're taking up, we're recommending a position on this piece of legislation or that piece of legislation when at this point, we can see ahead already, and that they are really complicated in terms of, whether it's the new SB 50, whether it's the homelessness initiatives that have been, being variously proposed by, Mayor Steinberg or by former Assemblyman Gatto in LA, and several of those are things that have the potential to radically reconfigure the relationship between state and local governments, and also between these different things, right? As I'm supportive of a lot of these concepts, but then when they come forward, I'm like, well, if a property owner can just, without my approval, take this piece of property that I was planning on building a homeless shelter, and instead, without, by right, build whatever they want to under SB 50, and drive up the prices in the neighborhood, increase rents, put people out on the streets. I couldn't put a shelter there, and adding more people than I had intended for the transportation system, and therefore I'm not going to make my climate goals under AB 32. That the legislature is not great at the connectivity between their policy silos, but the rubber meets the road in our cities and counties, and I hope we'll take the time between our committees and in the board meetings and at the staff work between now and the time that all of those things become hot legislative items or hot ballot initiative items, to really think through how would this work, what would be all our alternatives or our advice, how would we integrate them, so it doesn't turn into us, in the spring or summer where we just all go into our political corners, and maybe we'll all be in the same corner this year, frankly, but where we're left with a fight as opposed to the potential for proposing some real solutions from this board.
Appreciate that, very helpful. Additional questions or comments at this point? James, do you want to wrap up on this item?
Just to, again, you just sort of organizing this in terms of the things that are sort of being developed this year. The previous slide was kind of the things we are off and running and will implement. And I've mentioned these before, but this is a big year for housing, and you're gonna see that. That's gonna be in front of the Land Use Committee a bunch in terms of the regional housing work and the resources coming from the state. We want to make a difference. I mentioned next generation transit in terms of what's the next 10, 20 years look like for public transportation and mobility in our region. We have potential next Civic Lab cohort. We've kind of focused on implementation of the first 2 years of Civic Lab, but we need to be thinking about the next one. The Trails Plan, the pricing pilot, and again, that revisit of the blueprint. So I just wanted to give you all a sense, as I did this time last year, what's ahead. We know that's a lot of work, and I appreciate those comments in terms of focus and priority. But we do think this is a lot about making the plans that we've just all adopted real. And we look forward to getting your engagement on this for the next 12 months. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much. Without further questions, we'll move on to item 7, the Green Means Go update. And Christina.
Hi, thank you. We wanted to just provide a quick update on our Green Means Go advocacy efforts. I know James provided an update in December, but we've had a lot of activity since then we wanted to update you on, and then I'll close with what James referenced, our action requests for our board of directors. So just a quick reminder, this is our effort to get $100 million in the state budget to help with our Green Means Go program to help increase infill and revitalization of commercial corridors in our region, provide more transportation options, and electrify vehicle trips. We are asking for $100 million for this year with a total of $400 million over 4 years, $100 million each year. Since December, we've continued our meetings with the administration, including a second meeting with the governor's office. In the end of last year, we had a very successful meeting with the governor's office in which they asked us to come back, brief additional cabinet secretaries, and provide more of a formal PowerPoint presentation, which we were able to do. We also provided that presentation to the Deputy Director of Department of Finance. That was our second meeting with them as well. And we've continued to meet with relevant agency heads, and most recently GoBiz yesterday. We are, our biggest, I think, activity that's happened since December is we were able to get 11 of our legislative delegation members, assembly members and senators, to sign on to a letter to the governor requesting this money. This is probably the first time in a long time we've had that many legislators from both parties, from both houses, sign on to one request. So we're very excited about that. You will be receiving a copy of that letter electronically from Lynette as part of the toolkit that I will talk about at the end. But we are very excited about that. We are working very closely with our regional partners to include this as a regional push for our region. The Chamber, Metro Chamber, has adopted Green Means Go as one of their advocacy priorities for the year. And we are really working to build our legislative delegation as a Capitol caucus and using this Green Means Go request as a way to do that. We're hoping for a legislative briefing with our entire legislative delegation in early February to continue to remind them that this is a big regional push and asking them to continue to work together on this. In terms of our local efforts, we are working quite a bit on building our grassroots advocacy efforts this year to build off of what we did last year. So working with our stakeholders, our local jurisdictions. Rosie Ramos here at SACOG has put together an action toolkit for our stakeholders and partners such as the chambers, the realtors, the builders, et cetera. And she's also put together a toolkit for our board members, for you, because as James referenced, we are asking all of you to help out with this effort. I know many of you have already participated with meetings with your legislators, and we're very grateful for that. And that's been really key, I think, in helping us get that legislative delegation letter to the governor. Having our legislators hear from their constituents, their local electeds, that this is a regional priority has really helped focus their attention on Green Means Go for this year. So the pink item that you have is sort of the teaser. It's the first page of the toolkit outlining our 3 requests. Lynette will be emailing you the full document after this board meeting. We are asking you to first send a thank you letter to your assembly member and senator if they've signed on to this letter. And again, we'll send you the letter and list of who that was. Just again to remind them that this is a local regional priority and to have them hear once again from their local electeds that this is important and to reinforce our gratitude and them all coming together on something like this. The second request is that you share an op-ed in your local paper or in your newsletter if you have one. We've put together some content for you. We've put together content for all of these items that we'll be sharing with you to help really spread the word locally and again continue this effort to help push this as a regional priority for our area. And it has the secondary benefit too with local press. Most of the staff that works in the Capitol and in the administration, they read these papers, they see this content, and it helps remind them and keep Green Means Go on their minds as well. And then the last is just helping spread the word on social media with tweets, Facebook, et cetera, all of your social media platforms. We'll have some sample tweets for you as well as handles of who you can tag in terms of the administration and our legislative electeds. In terms of next steps, we are continuing to meet with obviously as many people as we could. We've gotten some great feedback from the administration and agencies on who to continue to meet with. We're hoping to continue those meetings and updates, and we're being asked to come back and provide second briefings, which I think is a very positive sign. And then we're really focusing now on the budget process. So we're going to be meeting with legislative leadership, with budget leadership, as well as the subcommittees, and we're going to be working to try to get this to be an item and part of the subcommittee process.
Great, thank you very much, Christina, for that update. Are there any questions or comments from any directors?
Chair Ferricks, if I could just draw your attention, Christina mentioned the pink sheet here, the sort of the three easy things we hope you could do to help. And I also just want to reiterate, especially when our state speakers come, our two guests this morning, that the Green Means Go map there, the little yellow pin dots are all the applications and support from around the region. So it just is a good reminder that this is really a regional effort to support your local housing and economic development and infill and transportation efforts. Many of you put in pre-applications and passed resolutions of support. So just want to draw your attention to both of those. And
Great, Director Chenier's got questions or comments.
Timeline on the op-eds that you'd like, is that relatively soon? I'm not sure on when this goes to committee.
Excuse me. I think if we could all be doing it now, we're hoping to place an op-ed in the SACB end of this month. I believe it was our timeline coming from Amanda Blackwood with the Metro Chamber and Pat Funkashita from the Asian Chamber, talking about Green Means Go as regional priorities. So I think maybe starting in February and then throughout the spring is what the best timing would be. In terms of the budget process itself, the next couple of months are going to be key with budget subcommittees, and then end of May, beginning of June is when many of the final decisions will happen, and we should have an idea around June 15th about where Green Means Go is. So sooner rather than later because of the shortened time frame.
Okay. And then I also want to make sure for Sacramento, and I know others have lobbyists also, that our folks are participating. So just if we can get kind of a report back on that, that would be great.
Yes, so we've connected our lobbyists with all the jurisdictions that have lobbyists with their lobbyists, and they are doing outreach with them in terms of how they can plug in. And so we'll make sure to update if we have any challenges or how that's going.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Additional questions or comments? Okay, great. Thanks so much, Christina. Appreciate it. Lots of work going on there. Let's see, next item is the Innovative Mobility Program update, and Monica is going to present that item. Okay, well, the microphone is right here, so I'm not, okay, well, I can, there you go. They might need to just up the, yeah.
Good morning. Good morning.
Exactly.
Good.
Good morning.
Good morning. This item is before you because over the remainder of the year, as you heard James reference earlier, staff is going to be implementing a number of new or revised programs as part of the Innovative Mobility Framework, which was adopted by the board last fall. The framework is attached to the staff report. I think a great place to start is what is innovative mobility? As your Director of Innovation and Partnership, I recognize that innovation is often a buzzword. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what that means for us and the work that we're doing. So innovative mobility really is about creativity and implementation, leveraging our existing infrastructure, which it's not just our roads, but includes the investments in transit that have been made over time. It really is about increasing options for all, reducing VMT. It can be big, it can be small. So it's not just about autonomous vehicles. It could be about a new micromobility connection that increases options for seniors. Innovative mobility has a pace and agility that is not typical to the public sector. It implements human-centered design or design thinking to test new ideas, iterate on those ideas, and to, quite frankly, embrace failure, which is really hard to do. I wanted to remind you of this program because we are going to be reaching out not just to your staff over the next month, but to regional stakeholders. Some of the components of the program are very forward-facing, including the Mobility Accelerator and the regional challenges. Others, like our process for reporting to the National Transit Database and implementing van pool subsidies, are a little less forward-facing. So the program represents a significant evolution in our transportation demand management programs over the past 3 years and has 4 main goals. One of those goals is developing the Mobility Accelerator.
That really builds on lessons learned from Civic Lab Year 1 and 2, also feedback both at the board and the committee. That really is about identifying challenges and matching them with the right solutions. A lot of times when we hear about new mobility providers or new solutions, it really is, let's just slap this new shiny thing into this community and not really understanding the community need and not actually using input from the community. So we really want to get better at that and also working a lot faster and being able to kind of prototype. So starting an idea small. And when we first started embracing on this path and we started talking about pilot projects, oftentimes we hear, we don't want a pilot project, we want a solution. And so the way we kind of frame our pilot projects is that pilot projects are stepping stones to a final solution, and they're usually lower cost and quicker. So you might take a planning process that can be hundreds of thousands or even in the millions that takes 2 to 3 years to develop. And then you might need to cobble that money together to implement that plan over 2 to 3 years. And with the pilot project, you can actually take incremental steps at a lower cost to test your idea and find out sooner that actually we're headed down the wrong path, this might not be the right solution, or this is the right solution here, let's go ahead and invest more or see if we can even scale a project or if we're actually going to fail a project. And if we fail a project, what did we learn out of that and how can we apply that to other places in the future? So it is an ambitious program to implement over 2020. Certainly projects will go into 2021. Staff will be back in front of this board to seek approval for a second year of the Innovative Mobility Program. The most upcoming things that I want to bring to your attention are the Mobility Accelerator. That is essentially like our Civic Lab process, which typically takes about 12 months. We're actually compressing that into 12 weeks. Now, I do want to note that that doesn't actually reduce the amount of staff time. We really tried, based on the feedback that we've heard from all of you and also from your staff, to reduce the time that it takes to participate in Civic Lab. And we haven't found a solution that doesn't dilute the end products. And the end products really are these strong challenge statements that when we do an umbrella RFQ, we get responses from places even outside of the United States, which really shocked us. So we're going to continue to keep an eye on that. How do we reduce the time it takes for your staff to participate, but we don't want to dilute the final product. Also this spring, something that we're very excited about will be regional challenges. So this will be looking at how do we bring in new ideas to solve, to reduce VMT associated with both residential transportation and commute transportation. We have great teams and great partners across the region, and we really, when we do these open procurements, we get to find out what we don't know. So we're looking forward to that this spring. And then also working with some new partners to hopefully grow our pot of implementation money. So this board approved $1.5 million to implement pilot projects out of our Mobility Accelerator. And we're in some early discussions to see how we might grow that pot with other partners across the region. So with that, I will pause and answer any questions or take any comments.
Great, thank you very much, Monica. Any questions or comments from members of the board? We do have one public comment on this item, Helen O'Connell.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak before you today. My name is Helen O'Connell, and I'm always concerned when we start innovative processes that it not be lost, that it's easier to change something before it is constructed. So I'd like to bring it to your attention that any innovative mobility devices or systems be accessible and affordable for those of us that are transit dependent. Thank you very much and have a good day.
Great, thanks very much, Helen. Appreciate that. Any other additional questions or comments from members of the board for Monica? Hearing and seeing none, we're gonna, James had just stepped out, but we're gonna actually transition to our workshop item. Our guests have arrived, I guess if they are making their way in. James, are we, yes, for their workshop item? Or still, okay? Great. I see Aegon here, and I think Kate was here as well. Great, excellent. So, colleagues, this workshop item this morning is regarding the state of California initiatives to support housing, economic development, and climate goals. We're really honored to have some key individuals in the Newsom administration here with us this morning. I wanted to sort of wait until, is Kate maybe on a call or something, or? Okay, that's okay. I just didn't want to start quite yet.
She'll be here in 1 sec.
Okay, no problem.
I'm happy to say good morning, everyone. Thank you very much
Thanks,
for having me. Aegon Turplin with the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, and my colleague Kate Gordon, who runs the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, will be here in just a moment.
No problem. Yeah,
by way of background, I can say I spent a lot of time in the Bay Area and worked very closely with MTC and ABAG, so very familiar with the MPO environment. So praise you for all the difficult and important work that you're doing here.
No, thanks so much. And Kate, good morning. Welcome. We're so happy to have you both here with us this morning. So I'll just set this up a little bit as we welcome both Kate and Aegon to our board meeting, help us learn about the state's priorities and the Newsom administration's priorities. It's a good time to, I think, also to sort of reflect and take stock of some of the items that we see as key priorities for the region. One of our board's key priorities for the year, of course, is to secure state funding for the Green Means Go pilot program. We just had an update from Christina about that, some of those efforts. Of course, the Green Means Go pilot program aims to boost housing, revive commercial corridors, activate rural main streets, reduce development pressure in our wildfire-prone areas, and also reduce our region's greenhouse gas emissions. So you'll see before you up here, to set this up a little bit, slide 1, we want to, of course, remind the board, you've also probably seen in your packets this morning or on the desks here, on the tables, this sort of 2020 MTP SCS document. Actually, James or staff, it would be great to get Kate and Aegon copies of these if they don't have them already. We just want to remind the board, of course, that SACOG was the first MPO in the state to approve a plan that meets the state's 19% reduction in GHG, and got there partly by focusing on how land use can have a big impact on GHG emissions. The transportation changes we need to make to reduce GHG emissions can only be achieved by land use changes such as building more housing in and activating our commercial corridors. So if you go to the next slide, please. So this program is not about making the urban core denser. In cities like Rancho Cordova and Marysville, there are many potential building sites along the commercial corridors of Folsom Boulevard or 5th Street that could host more intensive uses instead of sitting vacant or being underutilized. And then in rural towns such as Winters and Isleton have stocks of older buildings with great potential to convert housing, but face challenges, of course, such as the seismic retrofitting costs. This type of infill, actually, and if you want to switch to the next slide. Oh, thanks so much, appreciate that. This type of infill development is already happening in downtown and midtown Sacramento, but not much beyond that. The vacant site in the bottom of this slide is just 3 miles from where we sit today, Stockton Boulevard. We need to incentivize catalytic infill projects for the rest of the region. We've really done our homework, and when we designed this program, we talked to developers, economic development directors, planning directors. They told us the many reasons why it's hard to get infill projects launched. We can, frankly, incentivize them by subsidizing some of the costs that are preventing suburban and rural infill projects from penciling. So what might result from the Green Means Go program? For an example, consider this corner of Auburn as it is now, up in Auburn. See some political campaign signs there. I'm not sure if any board members, current board members, Bridget Powers used to be on this board, and Jim Holmes. But a rendering of what the type of activation that could be spurred by infill development. This is the type of economic activity we'd love to see spurred in our commercial corridors by the Green Means Go program. So we're extremely keen to partner with the state by aligning our goals, policies, and programs with the state's priorities, and we're also, of course, excited to hear from Kate and Aegon as how they see these priorities and how they reflected in the governor's draft budget that was just released last week. So With that, thank you so much for joining us again today. We're really appreciative of having you both here.
Great, thank you very much. So yeah, again, Aegon Turplin with the Governor's Office of Planning Research and Strategic Growth Council. And so I think what we're going to do today is just, I'll say a couple words as an opening. Kate will then say a number of words about the administration's goals and priorities and principles. We'll talk a little bit around regions and the importance of regionalism writ large, and then talk specifically about the budget that's just come out, the proposed budget from the governor, and some of the details. And I think you all may have the climate resilience portion of the budget that Kate will speak to directly. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the jobs and economy, economic development ideas. And then hopefully have a time for a dialogue back and forth between us and you. And just, I think I wanted to start by saying congratulations on having your MTP SCS out. We understand how much work this is, how important this is, and so really wanted to say that kudos for really getting through that process, having a unanimous vote in this environment, and that you really have some bold ideas that are in here. And so you spoke earlier about the fact that this was one of the organizations that had the first MTP SCS out there, but really thinking about the connection between land use and transportation and transforming your communities in ways that they are excited about that future. And so you're continuing that leadership on a statewide basis. And also, of course, you went through the RENA process. And as Ken Kirky from ABAG used to call it, the much-loved RENA process, which I don't know if that's quite how you all feel or each of your constituents feels, but again, that is an important component of this entire planning project we've constructed in California. And then third, I really want to highlight this economic prosperity strategy work that you've begun. And it's extremely important, not only because you're bringing really good data to think about your region, but you're trying to align a thinking of where your economy is going. And then with your MTP SCS, how do these infrastructure investments and land use concepts connect to that economic vision? And this is something we can talk more about it later on in this workshop, but could be a model for how other regions in California do the work. I think from a state perspective, we want to partner, want to engage with you. We also want to encourage great models of regional activity and regional planning that other regions can emulate. And I think that the path you're going on with this, with your economic prosperity strategy is really one of those. So that was just sort of a little bit opening piece, and I think from the governor's office perspective, you will hear from Kate about some of the priorities and some of the investments, but we're really looking forward to kind of an ongoing conversation with the Sacramento region on how to do this. So with that, let me have Kate come on.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having us here and for all of the great work that you all do. This is public services, sometimes thankless, so here I am thanking you for public service. Really appreciate it. And all the work you've done, particularly to think about integrating some of these key issues that we're experiencing as a region and as a state, including, of course, housing, transportation, land preservation and land use, and climate goals. I think, you know, in thinking about I'll kind of do overarching state goals on these issues and how they interact with each other, and then Aegon's going to do a little bit on sort of the way we're thinking about regions, and then I'll come back and do the deep dive into the climate budget, so which is how we're talking about all the investments we're making in climate. But when getting to the state goals, I should first say I have multiple hats in the administration. So I'm the director of OPR, also the chair of the Strategic Growth Council, and also the governor's senior advisor on climate change. The governor's office just put out an org chart, which is online, and I'm in like 3 places, which is really funny. I was like, where do I sit? But at any given time, I'm doing one of those things. And in my role, particularly both at OPR and as climate advisor, actually in all 3 of those roles, I really came into this administration because I believe in the governor's vision, which is that all of these things are integrated. He really has taken an approach of going from ambition and goal setting to implementation and action. That's really where his head is. And in doing that, thinking through how the different things that we're experiencing as crises immediately relate to these longer term issues, particularly around land use and around climate impact. So, you know, you'll see, and you've heard this week, I know the governor's doing an enormous amount on homelessness this week in Oakland today. You'll see a big emphasis on 2 areas that are sort of in the immediate crisis bucket. One of those, of course, is homelessness and housing. I don't know if folks saw the PPIC poll that just came out that put homelessness as at the top of all California's issues above everything. I mean, for the first time above jobs and economy, K through 12, really at the top. We all know, because you all have done a lot of work on this, that housing and homelessness are at root land use issues, transportation issues, and climate issues, right? These are all issues that are integrated, and SACOG has done, I think, is really important as a model for how to think about that, because you've had such enormous growth in this region and have had to think about what does that growth look like? How do we think about balancing that growth with our land use concerns, with the need to keep land preservation to some extent, with the need to make sure we have things like fire breaks. I mean, this is one of the reasons we need to preserve land, and thinking through what the transportation systems and workforce systems look like that undergird that. So I think we all know that these things are connected, but just to draw a point on the fact that the governor really sees them as connected. He's also been talking, of course, constantly about wildfires. And wildfires, when we say wildfires, we really mean climate risks or climate impacts generally. So wildfires are the most recent and obvious and crisis related thing we've seen, but of course other parts of the state and here as well are also dealing with extreme heat. Sacramento is no stranger to extreme heat impacts. Also dealing with flooding and drought impacts, and the ways that those things affect planning, right, and land use considerations. We are committed as a state to talking about climate change not just as mitigating emissions, but as we're becoming more resilient in the face of existing impacts. That is a huge priority for the governor, and you'll see it reflected in the budget. We have looked to regions like this, frankly, to think about how to do infrastructure planning in a way that's more resilient. I mean, you have been at the leading, regions like SACOG, and particularly SACOG, have been at the leading edge of that kind of question of how do you design infrastructure and invest in infrastructure in a way that reduces flood and fire risk. We are, so below those two, wildfire, homelessness, those are the headlines, right? Undergirding both of those is, of course, this thing we all talk about all the time, which is how do we get people to, how do we think about land use patterns that allow people to drive less? We will continue to see the climate impacts we're seeing as a world, but also as a state, if we don't figure out this vehicle miles traveled thing and a more sustainable way to grow. We will continue to see housing affordability, and beyond that, frankly, and we are constantly saying, and I know you are too, affordability isn't just about housing, it's about transportation costs too. So I can live in something that looks affordable from a housing perspective, but it's a 2.5-hour drive from my job, or even an hour drive from my job, and it's all of a sudden unaffordable from a housing plus transportation perspective. We've got to address that, or we will not see a change in the current situation. In homelessness, we know that a number of the people who are homeless in San Francisco right now are people who are homeless because they could no longer afford to keep up the schedule of living in Los Banos and coming into San Francisco, driving constantly, the car breaks down, right? And then you no longer have any ability to do it, everything spirals, and people become homeless, right? I mean, and are living on the street in San Francisco, which is near the job they still have, to be clear. Still working at that job, but without a home, right? Because without a car, because of the distances. So VMT reduction is central to these issues, and something that you talked about in your opening remarks here, and has been something that you've been focused on, and again, we've really learned from you. And then finally, something Egon got to, which is just the overwhelming, kind of overarching issue of economic prosperity. How do we make sure that we're creating sustainable, inclusive growth, and thinking about how regions are growing and diversifying their economies while we're thinking about how they grow physically and from a design standpoint. And that's something that you'll also see reflected in the budget, but is something SACOG's obviously done a lot of work on in thinking about, diversifying beyond government as a key sector. How do you think about the sustainability and inclusiveness of this region? So those things that are your goals are also our goals. And what we're trying to do with you is figuring out how do we take the fact that we have mandates like SB 375 to move forward to integrate all this stuff into regional planning. How can we help you do that? How can we support you doing that? How can we learn from how you've done that? And that's really what we're trying to get to in our regional approach to planning and to the budget as a whole. So I'm going to let Egon talk for just a second about how regions are reflected in the budget and in the governor's priorities, and then I will talk a little more about the budget, and then we will do questions.
Great, thank you. And if you want to pull up this, so last year, Kate joined the administration early on in 2019, and I joined a little later. And one of the things that was identified, the governor very much is a regionalist and has spoken about that, and is really also observing the structure of California and some of the disparities that exist within our regions and between our regions. And in 2019, Kate and then Lenny Mendonça, who runs the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, got tapped to be the leads of something we launched called Regions Rise Together as an initiative. And this is a story map that we put out, which you are all welcome to take a look at, just as sort of a communications tool. I wanted to just pull up a little bit. This is kind of a way of communicating what's happening in California's regions. One of the three pillars of this idea is essentially to start with California. We have a mental map of the state that we all inhabit and exist in. We're aware of our communities, but oftentimes we're not aware of the opportunities that exist throughout California. And so Regions Rise Together as a starting point was trying to say there's opportunity, there are assets in every region in California. We want to encourage investments to flow to all of those places. So I was going to try to pull up the H+T map just and kind of leave it there for a moment, so as opposed to talking through it. But that was really the first idea. The second idea, though, is really to take a regions-up approach to economic development and planning, that we understand that you often know what is best and what the assets are and how to make investments happen within your particular community. So how do we do regions-up planning is a question, and it's one of the things I'll get to in a moment in the budget of really trying to encourage a different kind of economic development. But then third, there's the interconnections between our regions, and that we're not independent and isolated, and some of the investments we've been making for years and will continue to do so around high-speed rail, around broadband for all, and other infrastructure investments are really about connecting us across California. And so making the case of our interdependence is critical here. And so I think within that notion of regionalism is the idea of one size doesn't fit all, that California is an incredibly diverse state, incredibly varied state, and the regions all have different strengths. And so we are trying to understand how do we do this partnership, reflecting that, recognizing the state has very important goals, and those goals are not changing, but we do have to work directly and deliberately with each particular region. And so I mentioned earlier the idea of SACOG really being a model, but for an example of that might be your rural-urban connections work that goes back over a decade. The kind of program that's thinking about the diversity of places within this region, in some ways is reflective of the diversity statewide. You have the variety of communities, the variety of places, the variety of economic conditions that are really reflective of the state overall. So as we think about Sacramento as a region, it becomes, in a sense, a sort of microcosm of the state writ large. So to that, we launched Regions Rise Together as a conversation with regions and spent a lot of time in the San Joaquin Valley and a lot of time in the Inland Empire as a starting point. And the budget does reflect some of that activity. And in a portion of the budget called Jobs and Economy, it speaks to a couple of investments in the Fresno region. And if you've seen that, what I wanted to highlight is that those are specific funding streams going to two particular projects. However, they're actually a reflection of a process that came out of a very, very broad group of stakeholders in that metropolitan region to come together to say, how do we transform this economy over time? How do we think long-term about changing the structure of our economy with an eye towards inclusion? A region that has had tremendous challenges, and that some of the observation from the data is that a rising tide wasn't actually lifting all boats. Many, many portions of the community were being left behind even when there was job growth, even when there was investment flow. So very deliberately thinking about that question of inclusion was core to that. And so the sort of quick timeline, and I'm telling this because part of the signal in the budget is hopefully an inspiration for regions to think about economic development in this type of way. That the Strategic Growth Council had made an investment in Fresno early on through the Transformative Climate Communities program to do some very deep work. And so there were a lot of partnerships that were created as a result of that. And we understand there's also a TCC investment here in Sacramento. That then enabled the former mayor, as part of the community foundation that she runs, to pull together this very large coalition that went through a process of thinking 10 years out, what are investable projects, and identifying them. And so two of those are actually included in the governor's proposed budget. One of them is a K-16 collaborative of really thinking about how do you track people through their programs and track them to opportunities in quality jobs. And so that's one portion of things. They're really trying to build out a model of this structure. And then the other one is, again, building on the assets, a partnership between UC Merced and Fresno State of thinking about value-added agriculture and ag tech and grounding that in downtown Fresno. So it's both economy and industry-based and place-based, located in the core of the region. So those are two particular investments I wanted to speak to, but they're not isolated. They are there as part of a process that region went through that really focused on these issues. And we are hearing a lot from regions around California that are interested in doing that kind of a conversation. So I think your economic prosperity strategy is the Sacramento version of it. And so to sort of conclude about this, it is not a single template for how to do regional economic development planning, but it is trying to inspire and encourage regions to do that. And the signal from the budget is that there was respect for how that process unfolded in Fresno and interest in seeing that come forward from other places. So I will turn it over to Kate to speak about the details of the climate budget.
Thank you. Tag teaming, as you can see, Egon and I have known each other for a long time, so we got the tag team thing down. Just a little bit more about the budget itself, as everybody knows, is sort of the single biggest articulation of the governor's policy agenda and approach every year. This is my second one, although the first one was written during the transition, so most of us weren't involved in it. We had to defend it, but we didn't write it. This one we were involved in from the beginning, and it is quite the process. I would not wish it on anybody. I don't know if any of you have gone through it in the state government, but it's intense. But I'm excited to where the climate budget piece ended up. We passed out what we call the A pages, which is a historic thing about how they used to have A in front of the page number, which is the budget summary, the chapter called Climate Resilience, which is really a larger climate budget chapter. And the key to the way that the climate budget works out this year is that it really is a direct reflection of, again, the governor's commitment to doing what you all already do, honestly, at the regional level, because you have to, which is integrating all these issues into one plan. It goes beyond our traditional thing of using only cap and trade money to pay for climate investments and actually expands the pot dramatically by adding two other funding sources. One of those is a new climate resilience bond that we're hoping to get onto the ballot. And the other one is a new climate catalyst fund, which is a revolving loan fund, which I will talk about a little more in a minute. Altogether, the climate budget has to be taken together because all of it interrelates. Altogether, the climate budget is an investment of $12.5 billion in climate change over the next 5 years, which is a significant investment for the state, and a big piece of that is leveraging private investment. This is not nearly enough to meet the crisis, but it is a significant investment and much larger than we've done in the past. You'll see in there some key priorities. I would say the governor sort of said as an overarching theme, we are trying to reduce climate risk, especially in our most vulnerable communities, while transitioning to a carbon neutral economy. So you'll see in that three things. One, reducing risk. We all know that climate change is here today, that we are feeling these impacts now, that it's affecting our transportation spending, how we build housing, how we think about our natural infrastructure. Some of our communities are especially vulnerable. And by vulnerable, I don't just mean disadvantaged communities the way that the state has traditionally defined those through Cal EnviroScreen. I also mean vulnerable because of the geography, vulnerable because in places that are particularly hard to access or that are particularly impacted. So we know we're experiencing the risks, and particularly in most vulnerable communities, and we know that we're transitioning to a carbon neutral economy by 2045. That's a state commitment. What does that transition look like, and how do we make sure that transition is equitable, as well as just being rational, and something that we can work with each individual region to figure out how to do, because each region of the state is very different. So what the climate budget does is sort of all three of those pieces, and at a very high level, and I'm happy to answer questions about it, we're trying to take a disciplined approach to how the government spends money on climate change. We are not, again, going to be able to ever have the amount of government funding that is necessary to meet this problem. The global market, there's something like $1 trillion financing gap between what public governments can do and the reality of meeting this multi-sector, multi-region set of issues. We here, I don't know what the gap is actually in California, but it's certainly big because it incorporates everything, right? It's everything you think about spending on transportation to make sure that you can do snow removal. That's part of this conversation. It's everything that you do to do urban greening to reduce heat impacts. That's part of this conversation. So again, what we've tried to do is really take a disciplined approach and include in the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund or cap and trade section those things where government has to do direct spending. So you'll see in that fund, most of the emphasis is on things like work in disadvantaged communities on air quality monitoring. So that's the 617 program. You'll see a focus on electric vehicle rebates for people under a certain income threshold. Not for everybody, but for those who cannot actually afford electric vehicles. You'll see an emphasis on vehicle retirement and replacement, which is also very much sort of a means tested to an extent way of looking at electric vehicles. You'll see a focus on climate research, capacity building in the local level and regions, and you'll also see emphasis on workforce training, all of which are real direct government functions. Much of the work to do the direct financing of projects has been moved into either the bond or the fund. So a good example, the climate resilience bond is really focused on natural infrastructure investments that can reduce the risks from climate change. Think of wetlands preservation or urban greening in places with high urban heat island impacts, or forest management for wildfires. The vast majority of that budget is water spending. However, our water portfolio process delivered priorities to the Climate Resilience Bond Committee, and we included about 80% of the bond is focused on water priorities, infrastructure, and safe water quality priorities, which I know is a huge issue in this region. So you'll see things sort of, just as an example, urban greening was in the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. We've moved it to the bond because it makes more sense as a bond priority because it's an infrastructure investment. The Climate Catalyst Fund is a new thing, completely new. It's a $1 billion revolving loan fund that will be strategically administered by the Strategic Growth Council, but actually administered day to day by the iBank, the infrastructure bank. It's intended to support projects that are climate focused, so that reduce emissions or that contribute to our resilience, that are already commercial. So this is not a venture fund, to be clear. It's not early stage innovation. It's not high risk. It's things that are already commercial, but that the private banks are not lending at appropriate rates because they think they're more risky than they are. There's a category of investments like EV infrastructure is a good example of this, where the private market is lending at very high rates because they see EV infrastructure as risky, because they don't see that they're using traditional models of auto infrastructure, essentially. Lending at near zero rates to those kinds of projects actually fills a gap and helps to scale up our electric vehicle adoption in the state. These are revolving loans, so they come back, and then we can continue sending them out. The fund is capitalized at $250 million the first year. It's $1 billion over 4 years. $250 the first year, then there's an evaluation period, and then there's $750 that comes in after that. Lots and lots of questions on that one, I'm sure, but I'm really excited about it because it adds essentially a whole new financial tool to our conversation about climate change and a whole new ability for people who are out there with good ideas and just cannot get a foothold in the market. Just another stat on this, we've initially organized the fund to focus on 3 areas that we think of as key to meeting our climate goals and where we know there's demonstrated need for this kind of financing. Transportation is a big one, but the other 2 are climate smart agriculture. And also the third one is what we're calling circular economy, which is essentially reuse of things like resources and materials into new materials. A good example of that up north of here is small-scale biomass facilities, trying to figure out what to do with all the forest material that we're taking out of the forests. So it's an exciting opportunity for a lot of things that people have been trying to do and can't do. And I'll just say one more thing on it. The banks both overthink the risk on some of these projects because they don't understand them, because they're not traditional businesses still, but there also is just systematic under-lending to disadvantaged communities in the bank sector. And so we really are trying to get at some of those systemic problems with this approach, and I'm super excited about it. So that's the climate budget. I can talk a lot more about it, but I'll stop because I know we definitely want to leave time for you guys to have questions. I'm going to have Aegon do just a little bit more on, you want to do more on regions? You want to go to next steps? I already did VMT, so I'm not going to do VMT again.
No, the only thing I was going to add on the budget that I didn't mention in the jobs and economy is that GoBiz is going to have 4 staff located in regions and that on an ongoing basis. So that's an example of really trying to put people in regions to help do the work. There will be one in the Central Valley and one up north in the Inland Empire and the Central Coast.
Yeah, and I think I mean, I already said that we have a huge commitment to kind of that, looking at that housing transportation intersection, which we know is so critical to you all because you're doing that at a regional level and a local level. VMT, vehicle miles traveled, is a very large piece of our climate strategy, but also just our equity strategy in the state government. We have had a lot of conversations with James about Green Means Go. Really excited about the integrated approach again that Green Means Go takes, and bringing VMT in as a core piece of that strategy, and thinking about land use, which we often, frankly, at the state level, we're behind you guys in thinking about this. The state has been taking a very, very technocratic approach, just to be honest, to how we deal with climate change and how we deal with transportation emissions. We've kind of put a lot of our eggs into vehicles and fuels, and we need to start putting some of those eggs into land use. And we've really honestly learned from you on that. That is not something that comes naturally to the state, but I hope you're starting to see a mind shift a little bit on this with this governor who is a true regionalist and really does understand the role that land and that those housing transportation intersections play in meeting all of our broader goals. So thank you for the work you've done on this. We know it's hard. It's hard, politically hard from a planning perspective, but we really have been inspired. And as Aegon said, I think you should see this budget and this approach as an opening of the door to regional approaches, not only being learned from, but also being supported. And really an opening to a conversation about how the state can play more of a role. We'd love to hear from you, what you're seeing working, particularly on transportation, what you need from the state in terms of us supporting your region up process on some of these things. Ultimately, everything I just talked about is a region by region issue. Every single part of the state which is a giant state, has a different set of problems and concerns and opportunities, and we need to learn from you and learn how to best do that. So I'm gonna leave it at that. Thank you guys so much.
Great, thank you so much, Kate and Aegon. Thank you, first of all, thank you for that. So I know there are a number of folks who have questions. Director Sander first, Director Saylor, Director Cobalden, Director Soon. So go ahead.
Thank you for bringing this to us. I think this is a really a good move by the state. I'm really happy to see folks at your level sort of focusing on the issues that many of us are fighting on the ground, as it were, in our jurisdictions. So I'm mayor of Rancho Cordova, which is, of course, the suburb just to Sacramento's east here. And we have light rail literally running from one end of our city to the other. This is the old Folsom Boulevard, so if you've been around Sacramento or been in our neighborhood, you know that as an old commercial corridor that has sort of failed in the in-between years as growth moved on to other jurisdictions. Yeah. What we have now is an enormous resource to address this issue of climate resilience, because we've got tens of thousands of jobs in Rancho Cordova, adjacent but separated from that rail corridor by Highway 50, basically a state project. And so we've got the opportunity to house a lot of people along that old commercial corridor, but connecting them to the jobs on the south side, that's a challenge, and economically making it work is the giant challenge. Mm-hmm. So we as a city have planned everything, facilitated everything, and yet constantly run into that economic barrier.
And you're talking about sort of the economic barrier of the development itself.
Right, yeah. Right. So we're a very diverse community. We're not a wealthy community, which means rents in our jurisdiction are generally, by all analysts in the private sector, considered low. Yep. Right? The bankers look at that and say, you can't make any money renting stuff there. Yeah. Now, when we do apartments and dense housing by those jobs, like in that jobs district, they command some of the highest rents in the region. Right there, because they're surrounded by literally, 80,000 jobs. Yep. But just on Folsom Boulevard, with all of its light rail and transit infrastructure, a short distance away, can't be done. No developers were really willing to take that on without massive subsidy for us. And of course, as soon as we subsidize, then all these rules and regulations pile on it, and that can almost kill it, just because there's government now activity and interest and funding into the project. So it's sort of a catch-22 situation.
Yeah, no, I hear you, and we hear this obviously a lot, and I'm not the housing, actually, there was a reorg within the governor's office too, which if it's sort of a item way down on the list of things, but it's important, which is that Jason Elliott, who had been a senior advisor to the governor and has worked with him for a very long time, they have a very good relationship, is now focusing entirely on housing and homelessness. So he now, that is very helpful, because you essentially have a housing czar within the governor's office now, who has very good access to the governor. We hear this a lot, and I will say that one of the things that the governor's been trying to do since last year is figure out where the actual intervention points are that work in terms of housing production, right? We obviously have huge housing production goals. We've just talked about how you can't just do that anywhere, that you actually have to think. He's very focused on infill in particular, but you have to, and on transit access and all the things you talked about. Where can we do things to help that? Last year, the shift of the $500 million for cities from general to the infill infrastructure grant program was a signal of that. What we were hearing from cities was, look, we're having to pay so much for infrastructure when we do infill that we just can't afford to do infill. You know, right? It's just too hard to tear up the street, put in the new infrastructure. It's just, nobody's paying us for it, right? So that shift was directly to address that issue. You'll see in the budget this year, we didn't print it out, but I recommend looking at it. The housing section actually has an entire thing about what we're trying to do inside government to streamline applications. So we want to get to a place where you do an application to HCD and it meets a checklist of things, and then it's puts automatically into a whole bunch of other application pools, and you don't have to do it again, right? You don't have to do 17 different applications, which is the issue today. That's a problem. On the regulation side, I mean, my office gets to do CEQA guidelines, so we spend a lot of time thinking about this, as well as general plan guidelines. We do know that CEQA is an issue, though not the only issue. We know there's a lot of other things going on as well. You do have at the local level the ability to do by right development. So really looking at that again and thinking about how do you get, if you want to get out of the CEQA process, you can do it at the local level. You just have to make the decision locally to do it, which is really hard and politically challenging. But there is local control over a piece of this that we don't have control over, but we're supportive of people finding ways forward on that. So lots of different things, but we always want to keep hearing where your actual barriers are, because we're trying to get at those actual barriers, not the perceived barriers or the sort of like what the media likes to think of the barriers, but like where are you actually running into problems? Is it mostly land availability? It sounds like no. Is it mostly labor costs? Is it construction costs? Is it materials costs? Is it mostly local planning and zoning issues? Is it CEQA? Sort of where are you running into these problems, and how can we narrow in and help figure out what we can do as a state legally to help with that? So talk to us.
Great, thank you very much. Director Saylor and Cabalden next, and then we've got a few others after that.
I'm Don Saylor, County Supervisor in Yolo County, and I'm delighted to hear the work that you're doing and to read this climate resilience budget. I echo Director Sanders' comments and look forward to many partnerships that will emerge from the work that you're doing. I have a couple of things that I want to just put out there as I'm hearing you and reflecting on where some of the linkages might be. One of them is on these small-scale biomass facilities. The business model for these operations is pretty archaic, and they're really doomed under the current circumstance that they're operating within, and they're a big, potentially a pretty valuable asset for forest management as well as for agricultural, regenerative agriculture practices. So I'm hopeful that we can, in the next year, do some work together regionally and at the state level to make these things more sustainable. A second topic that's similar is the community choice energy programs. There are 19 of them around the state, and they're also a promising practice that is continuously under threat from pushback from investor-owned utilities within the political structure. And I'm hopeful that the governor will step up and find ways to support the innovation that's coming out of those programs. And then central to the work that we do here, I think that the transportation connections between bus rapid transit and managed lanes and expanded use of passenger rail has a whole lot of promise for what we can do together. So again, thank you for being here. I'm really excited about your package and about what's even more promising in the future for a recognition of climate resilience as a central issue for our region and for our state and our planet.
Thank you so much, and I won't go into each of those, but I will say on the utility CCA question, there's an entire, as folks know, I think, a team of folks that's led by Ana Santos, who essentially took time from her job as cabinet secretary to lead a team that's working in the governor's office on energy issues specifically. Our utility structure is inextricably tied up with the PG&E bankruptcy, which is obviously an ongoing litigation. So that team is very sequestered for that reason, but there will be a lot more on this issue. I can just guarantee in the next couple of months, it's a top of mind issue for the governor. And we're definitely looking at CCAs as part of that conversation. On community biomass, I did want to underscore that because it might seem like a small thing to people who aren't you, who aren't in Yolo County and don't live it every day, but we are, because of our forest management goals in the state and our fire reduction goals, and all of the money I didn't even talk about, but there's an enormous amount of support for that set of activities in the budget. We are clearing or needing to clear millions and millions and millions of acres. And by clear, I mean do responsible forest management practices to reduce the risk of fire. That's resulting in slash piles on the side of the road all over the state that right now there is no market for. There's no thing to do with them. We're burning some of those slash piles. I mean, just think about that from anything perspective, an economic perspective, a climate perspective. So what we're basically positing, it's kind of bringing together a lot of different things because we don't usually think about forest management and environmental stuff in the same bucket as economic development. But we're saying, look, if one of the biggest costs to a bioenergy or a biomass facility, whatever you turn the thing into, cross-laminated timber, whatever it is, if one of your biggest costs is aggregating the forest material and getting it to the side of the road, we're doing that. We're contributing that. So how do we put that into a business model that actually makes sense and brings down your costs, right? So that's really what we're looking at. Huge priority for us because it's a priority on the forest side as well as and a lot of these counties need the economic development support as well. So really excited to work with you on that. Would love to talk more about it.
Great. Director Corbalden and Soon, Tixa, and Samoa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm the mayor of West Sacramento, which I think is pretty well understood to be one of the state leaders in a lot of these spaces.
We love your on-demand van pool.
But I'm really worried, but I'm excited that you're here with us, but also the different places in the org chart that you sit because we need the planning as a discipline and disciplined planning is essential. We know this from AB 32 and 375 and all those elements. We are not going to hit those numbers without the full powers of the state and regions and local governments to be able to deliver on them. At the same time, many of the discovery of land use as a tool in other domains of state government hasn't been informed by that notion of planning and discipline. And when the Bay Area gets a toothache, somebody comes at us with pliers in our mouth, even though all we really needed was a Sudafed. And this is one of these situations where if I doubled the amount of zoning in my city for housing, it's likely that less housing would be built. Now, why is that? Because it means if areas of the city that we are not currently focused on delivering infrastructure for, or retail services or anything else, if anybody can build anything anywhere, then my ability to direct development around transit corridors, around places, the one place that I can afford to build a new sewer this year, goes away. So the discipline that's necessary for me to be able to be held accountable on my SB 375 goals disappears. Yeah. And so it's more and more rapid. So, homeless shelter by right, but also 40-story tower by right. There's an excellent place for each of those. If you take the site that I had for transit-oriented development and instead you put a homeless shelter on top of it, you're going to hurt my ability to reduce VMT. Yeah. If you take the site that I needed for a homeless shelter and instead you put a 40-story condo tower on it and it's not near transit, you're going to hurt VMT and congestion and support for these kinds of initiatives into the future. So the state has to make a choice in some sense about how structurally to approach this. And to me, the answer is not just continue what we've always done, because many of my colleagues in other places, of course in our region we're perfect, but in other places they haven't delivered. But the state needs, I hope that you all can help the state see better. Can we use outcomes approaches to say, no, okay, for folks who are directionally headed in the right direction, we need to not only preserve but strengthen their toolkit rather than then cut around it with by right everything. And I think this region is a great opportunity for that.
Yeah.
Green Means Go is one example of that, but also the work that we've done on, well, we were the inspiration for SB 375.
Yep.
It's the only region that has the sort of political balance, the land use balance. It's the only MPO of size and resources in this state where every single city and county is around the table. So it's the only MPO that doesn't feel like it's the UN telling you what to do. It's the only MPO where there's true buy-in from the smallest city to the biggest city. So I just want to encourage you to think about both in terms of the dollar investments of Green Mean Go, but also whether this region can be sort of carved out as a pilot with y'all in the various hats that you're playing on the delivery and the policy and the innovation side as well. Because I'm really worried that we're moving to a place where we're being asked to be held accountable on homelessness and housing production and climate and everything else to a much greater extent, while at the same time our discretionary toolbox
Yep.
is withering away.
No, I think that's probably echoes what a lot of people are thinking, and a great set of points, and too many to go into in the time we have, but I will say, I think you should actually be encouraged by the number of places that I am on the org chart, and also that OPR and SGC are increasingly being written in to many of these policies. I should have mentioned that SGC is the strategic overseer of both the bond and the fund in the climate budget, and is running the climate research and community engagement section. So we are actually involved in many of these discussions because there's a increasing recognition that these are not parcel by parcel conversations, but region by region conversations, and that the parcel is only one piece of the conversation. One thing I would keep an eye on, it was in the governor's budget last year, and it's a process that's now happening, is the designation of pro-housing and what pro-housing means. Pro-housing is going to be an important designation because places that have the designation will have more access to more things than places that don't, and pro-housing as a designation is one that incorporates many of the things you just talked about. It's not a parcel by parcel determination. So I would pay attention to that. We're also at OPR involved, we will be involved in the RENA reallocation process and how we rethink that whole process. So we're paying a lot of attention to this. I won't say it's perfect. It's an education. Having regional people talk to housing developers is not always like, as you guys know, the conversation isn't always, it's a little apples and oranges, but we're involved in a lot of it, and really take that seriously. And I don't know if you're gonna say anything about 375, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to say that we're very aware of the challenges that every region faces in meeting these goals for 375. Some of them are structural in the market, as we heard about in Rancho Cordova. Some of them are kind of a policy basis. And there is actually a conversation that's happening across agencies looking at it. So it's not just in one silo, just beginning to think about what would it take to really make this work. And this is not an immediate thing, but we actually really want to learn from each region as you're going through this. What would be the changes in the tools that would be effective in order to meet the goals long-term, and the goals both being the statutory ones, but also writ large, the broader economic goals that aren't spelled out in statute, but are ones we're trying to get to as a state in terms of quality jobs and those sorts of pieces.
Great, appreciate it. We have time for, there's three more folks on the list, Darren Soon, Alex Tixa, and Ricky. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Frericks. Kate, Agon, Darren Soon, Councilmember for the City of Elk Grove. I want to thank you both for being here today as well. Really appreciate yours and the governor's thoughtful approach to all of this climate change, housing, homelessness. I'm going to build off of what Mayor Cabalden talked about, and that is the opportunity I think that you and the governor have right in your backyard. It's great to hear the regionalism approach that he's taken. I think you have a representation of California right here in your backyard, suburban, rural, urban areas, and all the things that we're facing. As it speaks to, a while back a couple years ago when Orville happened, the crisis at Orville, this board under Chair Veerkamp back at that time had a conversation about flood protection. And there's a lot of representatives around here that encompass disadvantaged communities. And so when I look at this climate resilience plan, it mentions flood risk, but it talks about protecting urban communities. It talks about multi-benefit projects, but there's not much in the way of protecting small communities, disadvantaged communities. And I would love to have a conversation with you offline about that in further detail, provide some input there.
Yeah,
And so-
and I should say the trailer bill language on the bond is being developed right now, and it'll come out to be much more comprehensive, but I can assure you that the water piece of it is very much aimed at both rural and urban, and probably more of it, honestly, is going into infrastructure and quality issues in rural than in urban communities.
Okay, fantastic. If I could, well, I'll still reach out to you if that's okay.
Please, yeah.
And then, my community of Elk Grove, we're a suburban community, as opposed to in the SB 375 and greenhouse gas reduction issue. For us, I would consider us pro-housing, so I'd love to make sure we earn that designation. But I think for us, it's going to be a connectivity type of challenge for us from a transportation, transit perspective. And I would offer just some, I really loved the revolving loan concept about financing for EV tech and that 0% financing. I think that's fantastic. I wonder if from a housing perspective, we could apply that for A&D, acquisition and development loans for home building. When you look at TCAC rounds for affordable housing, the criteria and the there's only 2 rounds a year, we could increase that. Maybe those are some things that we could look into from housing production.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, at the moment, we're thinking more of the non-housing side of transit-oriented development, mostly because we already have so much housing financing. And honestly, one of our bigger problems is to make our existing housing financing more accessible. So I would say the goal on the housing finance side within the administration is to streamline it and to make it more accessible and clearer and to put more money into things like infill infrastructure where we know we need more. And then to figure out how to buttress that with this kind of loan program, which is really kind of addressing something we haven't historically done. But it's definitely something that's come up in a couple conversations, and we're thinking about it. I mean, the great thing about the governor's budget is it's an opening salvo, right? We're developing all of this stuff right now.
Yeah.
So
Right.
there's a lot of time to make it better, and so I really appreciate that question.
Sure, and just real quick, I mean, streamlining is great. I'm just wondering if you lower the rate, it can make it more incentivization for.
Yeah, we're trying to figure, I mean, Cal HFA technically has that already in one of their existing loan programs, but it's not totally clear that it's being accessed how it should be. So it's sort of like, we need to do the discipline of going through all the existing programs and making sure that they're actually utilized, right? For what they're supposed to be, and where are the barriers if they're not, and then think about, this is really a gap-filling exercise. Where are the gaps in us reaching our goals and trying to be disciplined around that? But this is a great question. You're not the first person to bring it up, so thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Director Tiksa.
Hi, I'm Councilmember Titsa from City of Live Oak, and it was very encouraging to hear discussion on rural communities, because our community is very rural, and of course, our residents, majority of them wouldn't think the governor would care or know about our city, but it's good to report back that there are discussions on communities like ours. And one instance that I've seen is that we're very fortunate to be on a state highway 99, but again, it's very limited development concerning along with our neighboring cities. And one thing is how now the new push on climate, and as we, in the future, we know we're going to develop and grow, we want to be on the same standards as everyone else, because again, we're already in a lag. We're already on a 20-year lag of development and trying to get businesses in, For example, even the shopping center with 4 stores is huge for us. But again, other communities, they know shopping centers, it's going to die out eventually. So again,
That's a whole other conversation.
Exactly.
It's a whole other conversation about development, economic development in the state. But warehousing is a whole other thing we're spending a lot of time thinking about for obvious reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why housing is important for us, because again, as a rural community, it's orchards, that surround us. So we have orchards surrounding every single housing development. So again, as our city limits grow, we're going to have to now get involved in our green lands, which again, on climate, how is that going to work? But at the same time, there are innovations that can help, and the biomass is one of them. Because again, as orchards need to be pulled out or regrown and planted, all this old trees are all burned down. We all burn it. And again, it's one of those things where these rural communities, we can be used as a testing lab, maybe a visit or something they can put on notice. And Green Means Go is one example that can help us. Because again, we just need the financing. We're on a highway, but no one really notices it. and one issue is the banks. And that evolves with the housing as well.
Yeah.
So again, it's great to hear that their discussion of rural, and again, it's a discussion. Hopefully we can now get planning and the framework and visits, because it's very important for us to grow and develop just like every other city that's in this region.
Thank you, that's great, and really very much in line with what we're trying to do. And I think that Aegon pointed out with the Regions Rise project is really the governor is very committed to looking beyond the kind of urban centers of California in large part because they're very well represented by the legislature. And he feels like his job as governor is to be representing the entire state and particularly focused on areas that have less representation. So we're very focused on rural areas and some of the issues you brought up. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And last question, comment?
I just, thank you. My name is Ricky Samayo. I'm the mayor of the city of Marysville, north, 40 miles from here. We actually are going to celebrate our 170th birthday.
Oh,
as the city of Marysville, one of the original charter cities of California. In 1900, our population was 12,000 folks. Our population now is about 12,000 folks.
Wow. We're the same ones?
Let's hope not.
We're surrounded by a ring levee that protects our folks from, we're in the middle of two rivers. We have two state highways, Highway 70, Highway 20, that intersect us as well. We dealt with a lot of the evacuees coming down from Paradise and Orville. And we dealt with a lot of the cleanup through the trucks. And I still have a bone to pick with the governor's office about that. I would love to talk to you about some other point about, the impact that those trucks have through our town, our small town, and our local roads.
Yeah.
In any case, I can tell you that we are in my mind, like a old Victorian house that probably needs a lot of equity sweat and needs to work on its pipes and needs to work on its infrastructure. But we're a gem. And we are truly a historical place with amazing people, amazing communities, amazing neighborhoods. And I think the key for us is how do we get private investment to look at us as a place to make money. And infrastructure is a huge thing for us. We have infrastructure, but it's older. As I mentioned, 170 years old, and some of our pipes might be that old. So we need to kind of figure out our best way to look at our assets. We have a regional hospital, Adventist just came in with their birth center. We have a cancer center. Of course, we have Beale Air Force Base with a lot of personnel there and a lot of investment coming into Beale Air Force Base. We have Caltrans District 3 office there, so we're a focus of job center. We've got a lot of people coming on a daily basis. Again, our hope is that we can make sure that we focus on that infrastructure so that we can promote new entrepreneurship, new opportunities for people to come in, new housing stock for those people that come and work there instead of having traveling back somewhere else. So we're ready to work. We know we have some work to do in our codes and some of the things that we have to do. So we think SB $2, and we'll be working on some of that as well. But we're ready to go. I think we'll be a great pilot to see what you can do with small towns that have beautiful historical places, and they just need a little bit of help with the infrastructure and trying to get some private investment in there.
Thank you. And I'm just going to have Aegon talk a little bit to this because some of it is and of course we all want and we all recognize the need for new investment, and some of it again is breaking down some of the barriers because you have a lot of things going on with the base, with the Caltrans, like all these different pieces that touch the state, but they're not necessarily talking to each other. So I'm going to just have Aegon speak to that real quick.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that kind of OPR in its particular position is to talk and think across these silos that exist in state government. So there's been a lot of conversations to try to bring together intergovernmental groups that are that are grounded in place. So you have a Caltrans district office, you have a number of these other features. And so whether it is a larger conversation across the state of how does Caltrans really work much more directly with the other state agencies as they affect your area, or thinking about the idea that you have of really looking at Marysville as a particular model. I think we would love to help make that happen, and I think your Caltrans district office is a starting point, and in a couple of other regions of California, we've seen that they've begun to do an interagency conversation within their respective regions. This is actually happening in the Altamont corridor. So that's a starting point, but you need to bring in all the various other state peoples. So it's sometimes taking the money that's there and aligning it much more effectively.
And the transportation investments in our corridor are amazing. I think we're gonna do a $400 million investment just on the 70 corridor. So investment is happening, not only to make us safer, or to transport our goods along Highway 70 between Butte County and Marysville. Caltrans has been very open and talking to us as a city and how we work together and how we make sure we alleviate some of the issues that might come with an extension of Highway 70 and the investments they're making. So I appreciate their work that they're doing and keeping us informed and keeping us as part of the planning process. But bringing folks like the hospital, the regional hospital, Adventist there is going to be huge, the big workforce there, because especially we have a lot of seniors that tend to be isolated in some of our neighborhoods. So how do we make sure that they're connected to the services? And we lose a lot of young people because there are no places for them to live or even start their own businesses and stuff. So I think we can minimize some of the VNTs in that sense. That could be, the final impact in that, and getting people just to live and create vibrant places.
And just last thing on this, and also to your point you just made, and Agon's point, transportation tends to be they're the people with the most money, honestly, to invest in any one of these areas. Tying, the governor, I know you know this because he said it a bunch of times, but tying that investment, not necessarily conditioning it, but just on the state side, we're much more involved with CalSTA and Caltrans than we were in the past in terms of them being at the table for all of these conversations about how all of these decisions have to happen together, and why making an investment over here in one road actually has implications all over the place and needs to be thought through with other partners at the state level and at the local level. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for that, but then that sets you up kind of to what Agon said about, honestly, I know there's a lot of why did Fresno get the money? What they did was do that conversation, right? They set the table at the regional level with the stakeholders and integrated all of these conversations at once and came up with a fully integrated plan, which is much of what you guys have been doing with Green Means Go. And that was sort of why, when they came to the state, they had a very clear set of things for the state to support. And the state didn't support all of them, to be clear. They came to us with way more than when we supported. But I think that's really important. What we're trying to explore is how can we help you set that table and get to that place, and then also how do we best help you when you have gotten there? And we're very interested in that conversation. So thank you all.
Thank you again. We really appreciate you joining us today. I think providing an overview certainly of the priorities of the administration, very much appreciate that. And a lot of the things that the administration are seeing as priorities are priorities of this region as well. And certainly appreciate this ongoing discussion that we've been having with you in your office, certainly about the Green Means Go pilot program. And I think that, again, sort of reiterate some of my colleagues' comments that, we really believe that Sacramento region is poised to continue to be sort of the test bed. We've been, the first new MTP, obviously in SES, that, of course, with the 19% reduction and such, and just continue to really want to be that innovative test bed for the state. So.
Well, you guys are very on message, so I have to congratulate you for that. That was very impressive, a very clear direction here from you. So thank you for that and for all the work that you've done.
Thanks so much, Bob. Thanks. Appreciate it. Thank you. So, directors, we have just two last quick items. One, we're just going to have a very brief update from Rosie, abbreviated update on the Youth Leadership Academy for 2020, and then very quick, like 2 minutes or less, and then we're going to go into the closed session, and which should be a very brief closed session. Thank you.
Good morning, Rosie Ramos, YLA coordinator. I'll go very quickly here. One update is that the first year of the program was coordinated by Taylor Buck from our partner Pro Youth and Families. I just want to let you know that she has taken on a new position. We're very happy for her, and we thank her for all of the great work she did and setting us up for a great second year. Secondly, the request for you all is for your continued support as we continue this program. If you look into your packets, you will see the schedule and potential host cities. Let us know if you can help us organize a field trip, if you can connect us with a venue to host the workshop, or if you would like to make opening remarks at any of the sessions. If you have an event that you would like to invite the Youth Leadership Academy to attend, or you want to create a sub-cohort of fellow students from your jurisdiction, please let us know. We're happy to coordinate those meetings. And lastly, last year after every session, we held surveys post-workshop, and we asked them what they enjoyed the most, and every time it was the engagement with you all. So hearing you speak, engaging with them was what they valued most, and we hope that you continue to do that this year. So my contact information is in the packet. If you need to connect with to me with Lynette, you can always do that as well. If you have any questions, happy to take them, but I know you guys have a very busy schedule, so thank you.
Closed session. It's closed session.
On the positive news on the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, SCS, you have a copy, hot off the presses. The final 20-year plan is in front of you. This is the thinnest transportation plan we've ever adopted, and I hope everybody appreciates that fact. But I think it's also hopefully one of the most compelling and is the call to action. We have already won, the staff has won its first award already back at the Transportation Research Board this week. We've accepted the Zephyr Foundation, which is a relatively new organization for exceptional technical achievement for the work on this plan already. So it looks good, but it's also got all the right numbers in it.
Excellent.
Really quickly, you've got in your packet in front of you a thing to fill out on the Cap-to-Cap pre-tour. So we are doing that on Friday, April 24th. On the Saturday, we are going back to Local Motors to the autonomous vehicle place. If you didn't go last year, it's a heck of a lot of fun, right, Director Frost? So
she had a good time.
We almost got in an accident with the autonomous vehicle, and the autonomous vehicle saved us. So that was the... it was smarter than the human who almost tried to run us over. But if you haven't been there and you didn't go last year, the folks that went can tell you it's 3D printing. It's absolutely cool. And then finally, just committees start back up again in February the 6th. We have our transportation and lunar, and February the 10th, policy and innovation and strategic planning. And that concludes my report.
Great, thank you. Any additional questions, comments, or discussion for today? Otherwise, we will adjourn the meeting and see you all next month. Great, thanks so much.
Good job, Lucas.